Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos al Instituto Cervantes de Manchester y Leeds, nuestro canal de YouTube. Welcome to the Instituto Cervantes Leeds Manchester, our YouTube channel. A very special welcome to Professor ROSI SONG and also to our special guests, Irene Gómez-Castellano and Aurélie Vialette. We are delighted to present the second book of this series, Ex Libris, Publications in Hispanic Studies, which is our new project coordinated by Professor ROSI SONG from the Durham University, and which aims is to promote the recent publications about contemporary Hispanic cultural studies in the British and American academia. Ex Libris will take place all year round, presenting books of prominent scholars on Spanish and Latin American cultural studies, dealing with very different subjects: cinema, food, music, literature, arts. And the book we are launching tonight is Dissonances of Modernity, Music, Text and Performance in Modern Spain, which has been edited by Irene Gómez-Castellano from the University of North Carolina and Aurélie Vialette from Stony Brook University. In the dialogue they will have with Professor ROSI SONG, they will show us how music shaped us, transformed us, and is an inseparable part of our identity. Of course, they will discuss about the book and will speak in length about it. But what I find it very, very interesting is this analysis of the link between literature and music and the idea of identity and also the politics involved, all of that. The book also has a very innovative format, and it does not only contains written text. We will have also the opportunity to discuss about this aspect of the book with Jorge Mari, who has written one of the essays of the book, and with a member of the publishing house. Our guest will be introduced by Professor ROSI SONG, who is professor of and deputy head of the School of Modern Languages and Culture of Durham University. Her research field focuses on literature, intellectual history, and culture of contemporary Spain. She is author of Lost in Transition, Constructing Memory in Contemporary Spain, co-author of A Taste of Barcelona, The History of Catalan Cooking and Eating, and also the co-editor of Traces of Contamination, Unearthing of the Francoist Legacy in Contemporary Spanish Discourse, and towards a cultural archive of the La Movida. Her articles have appeared in journals of Spanish cultural studies, MLN, Revista de Estudios Hispánicos, Romance, Notes, Hispamérica, Revista Iberoamericana, España, and more others. If you had some questions, please don't hesitate and put them in our chat. We will have like 20 minutes at the end of the chat, the discussion, sorry, and the editors and also the participants of the project will be delighted to answer your question. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias a todos, a nuestra audiencia por estar aquí, a ROSI SONG, a Irene y a Aurélie por esta presentación. Para el Instituto Cervantes es un proyecto muy importante porque estamos tratando de acercar la academia, el pensamiento y lo que se hace en las universidades al público general y esperamos que disfruten de la velada. Muchas gracias y tiene la palabra ROSI SONG.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I can't believe this is already the second one of our series that we started. Thanks to Pedro Jesus Eusebio Cuesta, and also with the help of Carlos, who is supporting us in the technical part of our event. Tonight, I have the pleasure of welcoming Irene Gómez-Castellano and Aurelie Vialette. They have edited this really spectacular book, Dissonances of Modernity, Music, Text, and Performance in Modern Spain. And I learned so much reading this book, so I'm delighted to have them here with us today. I will introduce them very briefly, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about the project. And then as we continue with the conversation about some of the essays in the book, and then later and talk about the format of the book, actually, such an interesting way of presenting this material. And then we'll open up the floor to our audience today for questions to any of the participants today. So Irene Gómez-Castellano is Associate Professor in Modern and Contemporary Spanish Literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's the author of La Cultura de las Máscaras and the poetry book Natación, recently translated into English by Valparaíso, US, entitled Swimming. She's also the editor of Romance Notes, and recently she has co-edited this volume with Aurélie. Aurélie is Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies at Stony Brook University in the Department of Hispanic Languages and Literatures. She's the author of Intellectual Philanthropy, The Seduction of the Masses, published by Purdue University Press, and it was a recipient of the 2019 North American Catalan Society Book Award. She's currently working on a book on the penal colonies in the Philippines entitled Dispossessed Bodies, Civil Disability, Race and Biopolitics in the Penal Colony. Welcome, Irene and Aurélie.
Thank you.
So let's jump right in. So Dissonances of Modernity. This is a book that is divided in 3 parts. And you guys talk about with this idea of how music actually permeates a lot of spheres of our daily lives, right? And actually how music plays a role in creating a sense of community and how it involves the way that we function, live, read, enjoy, and so on. And it's really interesting because you divide this book in 3 parts, right? You have music with national dissonance. You have the zarzuelas, and you could actually call this dissonance of modernity. We'll get there later. We'll get to that topic later. And actually talking about gender dissonance as well. So why don't we start thinking a little bit about this project, how it came to be, what were some of your goals, how did you get started? And let's hear some of the ways you planned this volume. Irene, can you start us with this conversation?
Thank you so much, Rosie and Pedro Jesus and Carlos and all of the collaborators who are here right now and that will speak later. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, Aurélie, for joining me in this adventure. And this book started as a curiosity. I always enjoy interdisciplinarity, and I always had, great results in terms of fun by putting together art, history, and literature. And I have always been passionate about literature, poetry, the sound of words. And many years ago, I started to envision what will happen if we were able to overcome the challenges of not being an expert in musicology, but really wanted to see what will happen if you put together, literary history, the history of identity, with something that is not your field. So immediately I thought about Aurélie Vialette, whom I admire very much, and I thought she is an expert in music that can help put together this beautiful project. And it took us a long time, so we're grateful to the collaborators, but I think our book really does so many things at the same time. I made a list of like 12 things, but I don't want to start by speaking so much, so maybe Aurélie wants to add something right now.
Yeah, no, when Irene came to me with this idea, Dissonances of Modernity, I thought, wow, what a great concept to develop in Hispanic studies, because, we are all working interdisciplinary. I mean, interdisciplinarity is a keyword, right? But how do you translate that when it comes to music? If you want to produce a book, which is a written object, right? So how do you work with different specialists? And in the book, you'll see we talk about high culture and popular culture. We have musicologists and literary scholars and historians. So it's this mix of specialties, this mix of scholars who are making this book particularly interesting and appealing. And in the introduction, we situate the book because there is a lot of work that has been done in music in Hispanic studies, but this one is unique. Of course, it's unique in many ways. We'll see, but in that it brings together specialists from different fields, and it talks about both popular culture and high culture, zarzuela, operas, etc.
So thinking a little bit about that idea, right? Bringing different disciplines and writing outside of your own specialty, I think I totally very much identify with sort of that interest, yet feeling a little bit insecure about it in that process as well. But I also think that also creates very interesting opportunities of dialogue, right? I recently spoke with a senior colleague who said that one of the interesting things that we do as academic scholars, trying different things, is that we create spaces where we fold other people into our interests and we enrich each other through this connection. I was thinking a little bit about what you wrote in your introduction about how music is particular, right, in the way it is both practice and discourse, right? There is this practice side of the materiality of it, but the moment that you translate it in the pages, it becomes silent as well, right? And I was very taken by that reflection as you put together this group of words, but also your play with the word dissonance. So from what Aurélie just said, it seems, Irene, dissonance was your idea. So can you tell us about why are you playing with the word dissonance, especially in music?
Like I thought about the word even before the project, and I've seen the word used more and more lately. So, when I thought about the word, I saw a tension, guiding the idea of like putting two disciplines that are traditionally separated together. But, because this is a book of mixing things, I thought that the word dissonance it has a beautiful sound, first of all, but at the same time that it sounds nice, it captures attention that has something negative inside. So I thought that word, it has a history, and we can go into what it means for poetry or for anthropology, or how dissonances may describe the feeling of like inhabiting a world that where you feel that you don't belong. So there are many examples, but I thought it's a beautiful word that has a negative tension that is very productive inside.
So then you bring this beautiful sounding word, right, that also has some negativity in there, and you put it together with modernity, right? And I actually liked a lot what you said about modernity as sort of a state of imperfection, right? Aurélie, do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of this combination between dissonance and modernity?
Yeah, I would add to what Irene has just said, that when we think about music, we think about harmony. We think about beautiful sounds together. When we we think about a chorus singing, which is the topic of my chapter, we think about chorus singing in harmony, because if not, it's not performing well, right? And modernity has a lot to do with finding harmony in society. Yet modernity is not harmonious at all. And in music, dissonances happen as well. So we play a lot with the terms and with the fact that dissonances of modernity are everywhere. They are in the political realm, they are in culture, of course, in music, they are in social relationships, etc. So we built this road to help understand what happens in Spain from the 19th century until nowadays, looking at music and its relationship with other arts in order to understand society and the political conflicts that arose at that time and that were translated into art. So that's this idea of, seeing how human beings really want to tend towards harmony but fail. Basically, it's what we can see are dissonances.
So in this project, as you look into these ways in the way music plays a role, right, in this moment, and I think that your book touches very key moments, right, from the 18th century, 19th century, and even contemporary Spain, in fact. So what are some of the surprising things that you discovered reading from your colleagues, from the contributions, things that you also learn to connect, or perhaps not only learn, but piqued your curiosity, for instance, or something that made you feel, yes, this project had a purpose and here it is, kind of, contribution. I don't know, Irene, Aurelie.
Yes. There are so many, like with each chapter, I actually learn so much. Every time I reread everything. I want to say, for example, that we have here Jorge Mari, David Gies, Aurelie's chapter as well. And with each chapter, I have discovered something new. But I have to say that apart from those things that they will discuss later by themselves, when I always think about the main character of La Gaviota, because it's something that I've been reading for a long time, right? And to be able to see how that main character of the singer in La Gaviota was a real historical character, Serafina Gorgegi, a singer, and the fascination with that figure, with her voice, the obsession, the cultural obsession. And I have been reading La Gaviota and Su Único Hijo and many other things for so long, and I didn't know about Serafina. I didn't know about this historical character. So to see 2 chapters devoted by Margot Versteg and Lucha Arnoldoich devoted to this figure, and to see how sometimes these authors, in criticizing the figure of the singer, they're also at the same time singing their praises about them, in that paradoxical movement of negation and affirmation. I found it so rewarding to have that layer of meaning that I will always remember.
Yeah, that was actually quite a learning experience for me too, because I read La Gaviota, and I taught La Gaviota, and I actually did not know a lot of this story. So I had to go and revise what I was actually teaching, right, to my students. So this chapter will certainly be very useful. I also enjoyed quite a lot of that, the Italian presence in Spain. I just see that one of the collaborators is among the audience. David Gies' chapter was really enlightening. To talk about opera in the context of Spain's 18th century. That was really interesting as well. And as Aurelie was saying, right, sort of this mix of high culture and low culture, and sort of the tension that happens. Speaking a little bit about this tension, and actually, Aurelie, you already mentioned some of this in your introductory words. You mentioned that actually in Hispanic studies, there has been studies on sound, on music, and so on. What do you think that this book actually contributes to past works, and how it highlights or perhaps leads us to other ways of thinking about music in the context of thinking about Spain or studying Spain as culture, literature, society, and so on?
Well, there's one thing that we have to say that we really build on what has been written before, but the approach of this book is original in the sense that we travel a lot from one musical genre to another, as we said, but the book starts with Ana Rueda's chapter with the War of Africa, and we learn a lot about musical theater, and then we jump. There's another chapter by Lucy Harney, who's here, also that has to do with musical theater. And then we talk about, identity, and Jorge Mari talks about, national hymns. And, we go from one Catalonia to another. We have different chapters that talk about Catalonia as well, and Catalan music and its identity. So there's this back and forth between genres and places and its relationship to identity and culture that makes the book interesting. I think that the chronology of the book is also important because, we have chapters, as you said, that talk about from 18th century until nowadays, but it's not in a chronological order, right? We decided to divide the book in three different parts. And organize them around topics. So I think that's also back and forth, a chronological back and forth within the different parts of the book as well, that make the book interesting. And especially we want to put in, I think one of the ideas also that music is a practice in different ways. And that helps understand Spanish society, Spanish culture, etc. I don't want to speak too much, Irene, maybe.
No, you're absolutely, I agree with, and Lucy didn't say anything, I didn't see you, but thank you for coming as well.
So do you think that sound or music, I mean, it is actually cultural studies is also expanding in sound studies as well. Why are we interested suddenly in sound? Why do we talk about sound landscapes?
I guess at the moment when we were creating the introduction, we had been reading, I think, Musicophilia, the World of a Neurologist, and also The Hatred of Music by Pascal Quignard, and other works of more like a popular approach, but also very sophisticated to how music is something that we think we know, but there's some ways in which music enters our brains. It is so powerful that it used to be forbidden, like many times in history, music, or like even the mixing of 2 or 3 voices was so pleasurable that was rendered something threatening and was forbidden. So there's something so powerful about music and sound that transcends words, that it makes it fascinating and something that deserves more study in connection with affect studies. I think there's a connection between that wave where we appreciate now more like sound studies and also affect studies. And I think they're very similar.
Yeah, I think that, some aspect of sound studies that is really in this book is how a sound landscape can form groups, right? All kinds of groups. And that's something that I studied very much in the book. You mentioned intellectual philanthropy, and it's how music and the sound landscape that it produces can be used to political goals or social goals. How music is really like a political artifact in this sense, and the sound landscape has a role to play, can have a role to play in it. And I think that's one of the it's one of the backbones of the book.
And I think that gives us the perfect segue, actually, to talk about music and identity and invite Jorge Mari to join us. Jordi, if you want to unmute yourself and please join us in our conversation. You have a really fascinating chapter on anthems, himnos nacionales, right? Actually, this actually brings to the point, right? The sound landscape, the creation of communities, sort of this idea of sense of belonging, or actually being represented by a piece of music with words, obviously, right? That captures what we think is the essence of a place or a people. So Jordi, tell us a little bit more about your chapter for people who have not read the book yet. How you got started, what you discovered. Did you learn all the words of all the anthems of all the autonomías of Spain?
Well, yeah, it was a very fun article to write, and I learned a lot through writing it. It's not a topic that I had given much or almost any attention to before, but when Irene invited me to contribute an article to the volume, I thought, what can I do that will put into a dialogue music and identity and power and culture in the context of modern and contemporary Spain? So this idea of working about the anthems came to me. I found it was an appealing idea. First of all, there's very, very, very little work done from cultural studies on regional anthems. And so I thought it would be, a good idea to do something and contribute to opening that line of inquiry. And also, and I have to correct you here, Rosie, because you said that my article is about national anthems, but in fact, it's not. It's about the anthems of the autonomous communities, which is something that also has received very little attention in cultural studies. There's a lot of attention given to the nation and nationalities and national identities, which is something I personally am not very interested in. But autonomous communities, and let's remind everybody, Spain is a Estado de las Autonomías, no? So the autonomous communities, not the nations, are the backbone of the Spanish state from an administrative point of view, and yet very, very little cultural studies work has been done on the autonomous communities as entities of cultural significance. So I thought it would be interesting to explore the combination of music and also study what type of monster, what type of animal, what type of creature is the autonomous community, right? But to make things a little bit more interesting, for me at least, as I was doing some preliminary research, I found that out of the 17 autonomous communities in Spain, there are 3 that even now, many decades after the beginning of the Spanish transition, still have not got an official anthem. And I found, and it's Castilla y León is one of them, Castilla-La Mancha is the other, Murcia is the other one. So I thought I would focus on one of those. And to me, it was very intriguing. I found it more intriguing to explore how come, when transition and democracy has been marked by an obsession with foundational myths and signs of identity and, all sorts of stories and artifacts. And so how come there are still 3 communities that have not wanted or been able to find or settled on an official anthem? What's behind that? What sort of discussions have there been? What sort of dissonances are behind this lack of an anthem? So that's what I set out to explore. And in the process, I found out a lot about Castilla y León, which is very, it's a dissonant community, whatever there is one. And also I found a lot about the process, the transitional process in Spain. I studied the anthem in connection, or the anthems of different communities in connection with their Estatutos de Autonomía, which are the other foundational texts for the communities. And I found that the Estatutos de Autonomía of each community are very consistent with the messages that you find in the anthems of those communities. And I put that in the context of the negotiations and discussions that were part of the creation of the autonomous communities during the transition. What values, what principles we're trying to use as the foundational values for those communities. Of course, in the case of Castilla y León, there's not an official anthem, which in itself tells us a lot about the community, but there have been many proposed anthems and many attempts to create an anthem. And I explore in the article a few of those. And it was a very fun article to write. So yeah, that's what I can say, Justice.
Yes, and I do stand corrected. I meant the anthems of the autonomies of Spain, and I actually was very it was very fun actually to read your analysis of some of the proposed texts and the problem of that conjunction, right? So what it means to be Castilla y León, right? And somehow these two places not being able to broker the same standing in the way that their spirit or identity or whatever it is captured through words. So the tension, the dissonance there present in your essay was really enlightening to read. And I absolutely hear you about how we have somehow forgotten to actually pay attention to the autonomies in our focus of studying or trying to understand the process of the transition. We talk about democracy, we talk about sort of the historically established identities, but we really don't think more about these politically formed autonomies that actually have resulted in what is Spain today. So thank you very much for that essay. And Aurelie, I think this also leads you to moving from those autonomy sort of regional identities into these sort of more historical ones, right? And you actually in your chapter talk about these choirs and talk about actually music as sign of civility and modernity. And what sort of work is the work of the choirs do in the context of Catalonia? Can you tell us a little bit more about that chapter and actually connected to your book, obviously?
Yes. So I took the opportunity to write this chapter with some material that were not included in the book, and that were kind of in my dissertation. So because my dissertation was about popular music in Catalonia in the 19th century, and especially the choruses of workers. So in this chapter, what I do is that I go back to a wonderful archive I've worked on, Josep Anselm Clavé's archive. He was a composer, a worker. He decided to build choruses of workers in the 19th century in Catalonia and put the workers on stage, uneducated workers. He taught them how to sing without formal education. So that just by itself is a dissonance, because how can you organize a concert with workers, first of all, because workers don't have access to music, they don't have access to culture. So this in itself is a dissonance, but on top of that, they don't know how to sing. They don't have formal musical education. So it's another dissonance in a country or in a region where what the worker represent is a dissonance of modernity. The workers are in the streets, they complain, they have they try to do the revolution, etc., etc. So this entire project seemed really relevant to the book. And I explained how, in this case, building a harmony with this dissonance is a technique of government. How you can use music and you can use a group that in principle is not close to music, make them sing among a big repertoire, make them sing Wagner, which is the case example I work on here, because these choruses of workers so the Cors da Clave were the first to put on stage Wagner in Spain ever, right? 1862, everyone thinks it's Lohengrin in 83 or 88, I'm not sure. In the Liceu is the opera theater in Barcelona, but in fact not. It was the working class who did that with clave, and that's another interesting aspect. Why is it silenced in musical history, in Wagnerism, in the history of Wagner in Spain? why, when you read the history of Wagnerism in Spain, they don't acknowledge that the first time, a piece of opera by Wagner was put on stage was by a choruses of worker, and not in the opera theater of Barcelona. Of course, Barcelona is the most Wagnerian city in Spain. So that's an interesting case, I think, that kind of summarizes part of the intellectual project of the book.
And I actually really love the way you talk about the spaces in which these choirs perform, right? These open public spaces. And also, obviously, their entrance to buildings like a liceo as well. But perhaps, as these workers' choirs, the fact that they perform in these parks or these open spaces, public spaces, where the public is given flyers with the words of the choir so they can sing along, and they bring it to their home. And that's how sort of music permeates that moment, that culture, I think is really interesting. And I actually just read Alex Rose's on Wagnerism, and you're right, I don't think he actually mentions Claves choir. So, that's a footnote that needs to be there at some point. Speaking of then, music and going back to that idea of practice and discourse, right? I mean, we talk about music, we write about music, yet we're not able to hear it. So in fact, your book presents it in a very innovative way, right? You've managed to create something actually quite new. So right now, I'd like to invite Heather and perhaps the editor of the North Carolina University Press to join us in conversation about how you gave space and support to this project that is traditional in a way, but also not traditional because it required a different kind of material to be incorporated in that format of the book.
Hi everyone, my name is Heather Minchu and I'm the managing editor for the series, and worked closely with Juan Gonzalez-Espitia, who's the editor for the series. And I don't know if Juan Carlos would just like to talk broadly first about the overall idea of incorporating music to accompany the text before I talk through some of the more practical and logistical side of the format and how we accomplished it. But I know he kind of generated the idea with Irene and Aurelie. So as a team, we thought, a book about music and musicology, how wonderful would it be to have actual audio examples of the music to accompany the text so that readers could really understand these examples of what it is that's being written about. So we invited all of the book's contributors to participate in this component of the project. And more than half of the chapters in the end have music files to accompany them, and at least one chapter from each of the 3 parts of the book. So we built a playlist of music files to accompany the text on our website, and I will put the link in the chat. So the link should be in the chat so people can see it on their own computers, but it's a simple audio playlist that goes chapter by chapter for those that decided to participate, and includes excerpts and examples of the musical phenomena that the contributors are writing about. So in the front of the book, I have the book here. We have a list of all the sound files and all of the citation information and the permissions. And if you can see, there's a QR code. And if you scan this QR code as you're reading the book, it'll actually take you straight to the playlist on your device as well. So you don't have to type in the link. So some hurdles that we ran into as we were building this component. One of the concerns was securing the proper permissions, understanding the copyright laws around the music. So I became fairly familiar with US and Spanish copyright law around music and recordings. And in many cases, the music was composed quite a while ago. And obviously the compositions and the arrangements are in the public domain, but the performances and the recordings were more recent and have their own set of rules. So we had a handful that did fall in the public domain. And in one case, the author was able to get the permissions for his songs They were all on the same CD, and he had a connection. He was able to get those permissions. But in many cases, what we thankfully found was that the law permits for the excerpting for educational non-commercial use. So as long as you're not reproducing the entire recording and you're just using a portion and you're doing it for educational non-commercial reasons, you can use it. So in this case, we asked our contributors to find recordings, mostly on YouTube, and to give a timestamp for the beginning and the end of the excerpt that they felt was most representative of what they wanted the readers to hear. And then using free online tools, we trimmed the videos, extracted the audio, and built an audio only playlist from these, and then just made sure to properly credit and cite all of the composers, performers, and even the YouTubers and their channels who had posted the music. And in one case, Lucy Harney is on the call, I believe, but another hurdle we ran into was two of the zarzuelas, the two that she wrote about. We could not find any recordings anywhere. We checked with our music librarian at UNC. We checked with a foundation in Spain that had old programs that showed that those songs had been performed back in a decade or so ago, but they didn't have recordings. But our library had access to the sheet music. So in the end, I worked with a music director at a local church, and we actually made 2 new recordings of those songs and included them on the playlist. So we were able to get songs for her chapter.
Not all university presses provide editors who can sing, though.
No.
Perhaps Juan Gonzalez-Espitia can join us now and tell us a little bit more about what it means for the series to have a book in this format from among his series of titles on Hispanic studies.
Thank you so much. I thought that you were going to ask me to sing. I cannot sing for my life. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and also Aurelie's and Irene's invitation, and the fact that they thought that our series was a good place for the book. And it was wonderful from the very beginning. Was the kind of project that you say this is a no-brainer because of the quality of the participants. So that was very easy. And it was also very easy to find readers that will assess the book and give us feedback. And I think the feedback was very, very useful. It was thorough, but I think it was also because of the quality of each one of the works. Each book is a different thing. I would say. Jordi was saying, different monsters. I think I'm not going to say monster, not that every book is a monster, but yeah, they are all different. And when I saw all this work, to me, there was a dissonance, and the dissonance was there is no sound. And luckily, we are living in a different time now. It is possible to do other things. So we do different things with different books. In occasions, we are working with images, and in this case, this was very important. And we are very lucky that everybody collaborated, and Irene and Aurelie were involved in the process, and especially Heather, who, as you have heard, had to do a lot of administrative work there, finding many things. And so we are very, very happy about that. And I hope that this example of what we are doing with our series will entice you to read more of the books that we are producing. I think in every case we are trying to really do something special with every book. We are not just churning one book after the other. We are trying to do a good job and serve our profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And definitely each book, perhaps not a monster, but an animal of its own would be a good term to use, right? With its own complexities and challenges. And definitely, I think that we are in a moment in which we can be a little bit more flexible with the materials that we use. And I was just going to say that after the year and a half that we just lived, we're a lot more familiar on how to use the QR codes, right? So actually, when I was faced with the QR code in this book, I was like, aha, I know what to do with this. You know, in fact, I have an app on my iPhone to work with this. So we are in new times, and hopefully we will see more books in more creative formats as well. I'd like to open now to our audience who have been very patiently listening to us, hopefully with interest, that something caught your attention. Then there are questions. Perhaps we can take some questions from our listeners or our viewers. You can unmute yourself and ask the question, or if you like to use the chat bar, please use so. And I'm just gonna very quickly read some comments while we wait for these questions. Rebecca Haig says that she found the music accessibility, that the music actually enhanced the arguments wonderfully. And definitely, thank you for the idea. And I also enjoyed that part quite a bit. Any other questions from the audience? If not, we can continue our conversation.
Yes, I have a
yes.
question.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this. I'm learning a lot, and I find the material and how the book and the whole project have been made wonderful. Have you thought about the idea of maybe translating the book in Spanish? Because I think there would be a lot of interest in the academia in Spain, and also not only the academia but the general public, because I don't think there are many words in Spanish-speaking academia world with this focus on this analysis, this innovative analysis, and the fact of having the not only the written text, the analysis, but also the music at the same time.
Yeah, no, that would be wonderful. It's complicated. If you have, any idea about that, I think Irene and I would welcome them. It's quite expensive to translate and publish, in another language, and that would be just, I think, the main problem in terms of intellectual project. It would be amazing, of course, because this book, we didn't talk so much about literature, but it has a lot of, literary analysis as well. And that's something that I think makes it interesting for, colleagues, because, many writers in the 19th century, many novelists, including music. We have a few chapters on Galdós, for example. I mean, Irene talked about that as well. And I think that would be a good addition to, translate it into Spanish. So why not?
Yeah, I agree. It's a wonderful idea, and the logistics may be a little bit more complicated, but
it is.
Yes, but there are programs. I mean, maybe it could be with a greater support, that there are programs that you might know that supporting the translation of form in English to Spanish from the Spanish government and the Ministry of Culture in Spain. Anyway, as you mentioned, there is a lot of literature, Galdós and many others, and it would be a great thing for the Spanish-speaking people to have the chance to get to know your work. Thank you.
Yes, and I think that the support for translated version seems to be popular among our listeners as well on the chat bar. And definitely, I think that one of these academic enterprises that we engage in would like to create dialogue and connection. And clearly, music surpasses these boundaries because it doesn't deal with language, right? While we are somehow limited by it, unfortunately, in these cases. So a translated version would be wonderful, and hopefully this book will find a new life in Spanish as well, or a parallel life, I should say, in the near future. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I have a few on my own. So until somebody can come up with more, I'm just gonna keep on asking if you don't mind. So one of the things that I was also thinking was that we're so used to talk about concepts as modernity and so on in terms of discourse, literary works and stuff. But working with a different discipline, and I think there are glimpses of it, and especially from actually contributors that work on music, right? And it got me thinking about so how we combine, or how do you understand modernity from a musical perspective? Can you explain, or how do you engage with that sort of writing without musical training? And I think your book makes it very accessible. But did you learn something in this process of thinking about modernity, not from sort of that literary cultural perspective that we're quite used to we're used to working with it, but from a musical perspective?
Well, if I may say something regarding the idea of modernity, is that it's so elusive that it's almost as a non-existent thing. But one thing that I really learned is that when you read a literary history of Spain or a musical history of the Iberian Peninsula, and then you read, a history, like a history of Spain, they portray three different countries, and within those traditions you can see even more variations. So I guess the idea of modernity teaches you to be aware of the traps of modernity, which I know David Gies is here and he's such an expert in modernity. I don't know if he's going to talk about his chapter, but I know he knows so much about modernity in Spain that I don't want to let him go without saying something.
Absolutely. This was a trap. I was hoping that David would jump in. So David, please.
I actually was not going to participate a lot, just learning from all of you and learning from this incredible book. And I wanted to praise both Irene and Vialette. I mean, I really, and, Juan Carlos and everybody and Heather, who I didn't realize sang for the book. But it's really an extraordinary production, because those of us who study this, as Irene just said, they seem to be three different countries. But when you really study the time period and study what's going on, music, and this was really a battleground. I mean, this was really a battleground for what Spain was to become. So we call that becoming modern. We lurching toward modernity. Now, in our field, every single time period has claimed to be the beginning of modernity. So the medievalists think it's, they're the beginning of modernity, and the Golden Age people and the early modern people and the 18th century people. So, and it's a big enough field we can accept all of those arguments. But music and literature and politics and theatrical performance and the economy all were so more tightly integrated, I think, than they are today. Yeah, today we have musical comedies, but then we had, a serious play, and yet a serious 3 or 5 act play in between the acts, as we all know. Mm-hmm. They had a little ditty, they had a singer, they had a dance troupe, and then they kind of would integrate the dance troupe. And I use the word integration really skeptically, because they weren't integrated at all. I mean, all of a sudden, there's this serious thing being discussed on stage, and a group of, dancing girls, would dance by, according to what we read. I mean, obviously, we weren't able to see any of those performances. We know that Lara, for example, all through his articles, he is obsessed with music. He's obsessed with opera. He's obsessed with Judith Grisi, the famous Italian. And then you see that spilling over into so many corners of literature as we know it, and literary studies. And so this convergence that you have all brought together in this book is really quite extraordinary, because it's all there. This battleground along class lines, along gender lines, high versus low, opera versus variete. It's all there. And I think you really highlight this in ways that we haven't really thought about it deeply enough in the past. And you've opened up lots of pathways for us. And I mean, not only the contributors that are here, but and the editors, but also the press, that has had the courage to publish a book like this. So I'm really very excited. I'm very grateful that I was snookered into, invited to contribute a chapter to this quite extraordinary book. So thank you all very much. I don't think I answered your question, Irene, but there you go.
Thank you, David. That is so nice.
Yeah, it was wonderful to hear from you, David. And absolutely, but I think that is precisely the idea that music was also there in the midst of all of this questioning and looking and searching, and perhaps in different sounds too, but whatever it was heard or whatever's being composed was later talked about, right? So in the writings of Larra or in the writings of Jovellanos and so on, they are discussing because this is what people were listening to and hearing. And I actually was thinking about your chapter on the Italians and their presence in Spain, and actually thinking that the Teatro Real this year actually started their season with the Cenerentola, right? The Cenicienta, the Italian version, the Rossini's version. So the presence of the Italians still strong in Spanish opera, it seems. But I did not know the backstory about this tension and when they come and how they become popular and so on, and the play that Fernando VII actually plays in promoting Italian operas in Spain.
And how conflictive it all was, which it isn't as much today, but it was a real, battleground is the word. It was really conflicted.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? Yes, Aurelie? Oh, no, sorry, I didn't. So I think that Pedro, Jesus and I were talking about how this space actually allows participation from so many different places across multiple timelines. We feel very privileged and honored to be listened to and to be able to create this space. Thank you so much to everyone for being here, for sharing your work with us. We have another conversation coming up in the beginning of next month. Again, the first Tuesday, same time, same channel. And for the next presentation, we will be talking about film and also sound, actually, through Kinky Films with Tom Whitaker from Warwick University. So hopefully you can join us. Thank you again, Irene, Aurelie, Jorge, David, Heather. You can sing us goodbye if you want.
I want to thank everyone. Thank you for this wonderful invitation, Rosi, and of course, Pedro, Jesus, and Carlos, and Irene. So happy we could be here together and with our editors who did an amazing job. So thank you all, and glad some authors could connect as well. So it's very nice. Thank you, Rosi, for this invitation.
Thank you so much. I was very excited when I saw this book. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much again, Instituto Cervantes, for having us and creating this space for us. And hopefully we'll see you again next month. Thank you so much, everyone.
Muchísimas gracias a todos, Rosi, for to create this project and this a great idea, and the energy we feel, and to share so much knowledge, and it's really a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Irene, Aurelie, and all of you for being there, and see you hopefully next month. And we are also very happy because we will keep that in our YouTube channel. So what we have been discussing, what we are sharing is there forever in the Instituto Cervantes. For us, it's a great privilege. Thank you very much.